The USS Scorpion was one of only 2 nuclear submarines ever lost by the U.S. Navy.
That's right. It sank in 1968, and the question is why?
Was it a peacetime accident? Or was it attacked? At the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, 500 miles west of the Azores Islands, these eerie images mark the watery grave of the USS Scorpion and her crew. In this photo, you can see the submarine sail ripped from her topside. How did the Scorpion end up 10,000 feet underwater? The mystery begins on May 27, 1968 in Norfolk, Virginia. Wives, friends, and family members gathered at Pier 22 on the Norfolk Naval Station, eagerly awaiting the Scorpion's return. But Pier 22 would remain empty that day, as the USS Scorpion never makes it home.
No one really knows why. The Navy doesn't know why. The Navy kind of goes into dither mode initially with the families. Eventually, pretty quickly, people realize there's a big problem. Submariners are extremely reliable. When a submariner says, I'm going to be at a place at a certain time, they're either dead or they're there.
Since our briefing yesterday, the search effort has expanded considerably.
9 days after the Scorpion was a no-show, the United States Navy declares the sub and its 99 crew members presumed lost. They commence a massive oceanic search. But it isn't until October that they locate the Scorpion on the ocean floor. At least what's left of it. What could have caused such devastation? Rumors begin floating to the surface.
When it comes to why the Scorpion sank, there is no shortage of theories that claim to explain it.
The Scorpion's what's known as the skipjack class of submarine. After being introduced in 1959, the skipjack subs remained the fastest subs in the U.S. Navy until the mid-70s.
But what made the skipjack class truly unique was its teardrop hull design. It moved the torpedo room back a bit from the bow of the boat, which allowed it to fire torpedoes diagonally from the sides. Now, that made less noise to interfere with the sub's sonar.
The Scorpion fired Mark 37 torpedoes that were lethal for almost all but the biggest of ships. So she was fast, she was sexy, she was deadly. But the question is, why'd she sink? Almost 25 years after the USS Scorpion sank, the Navy finally declassified its official explanation. According to this report from the 1968 Naval Court of Inquiry, the most likely explanation was that Scorpion was sunk by one of its own torpedoes. The battery-powered Mark 37 is somehow activated in its tube. Unable to shut it down, the crew jettisons it. But the armed torpedo now hunts for the nearest target and destroys it. That would be the Scorpion. An interesting theory, but former submarine commander David Marquet doesn't buy it.
I think this is extremely unlikely. Scorpion, if she knew the torpedo was coming back after her, has depth, she has speed, she has a number of ways to try and evade her own torpedo. Secondly, the torpedoes are deliberately designed to not do this, and the warheads don't arm until the torpedo is sufficiently safe away from the submarine.
If the torpedo theory doesn't float, then what really happened? Could the Soviets have been behind it all? Headed for home, the Scorpion gets classified orders to change course. Why? A suspicious flotilla of Soviet warships is patrolling the Canary Islands, and the Navy wants eyes on it. Author and former submarine engineer Kenneth Sewell thinks it was all a trap to take down an American sub.
The Soviets knew we would investigate. They knew we'd be sending a sub.
Just months earlier, John Walker, a U.S. Naval Chief Warrant Officer turned spy, supplied the Soviets with secret codes that allowed them to intercept naval messages, like the one that sent the Scorpion to the Canary Islands.
They were getting the codes from the spy, and for the first time in their history, they had the ability to kind of track and know when that submarine was going to be there. There's no doubt in my mind that the Soviet Navy attacked and sank the USS Scorpion.
Historian Martin K.A. Morgan disputes the idea of a Russian torpedo and suggests the fate of the Scorpion may have been something far more simple.
I think the reality is that the ship was lost for much more mundane reasons. Like there was a fire on board, they couldn't extinguish it, and it knocked out power, and then the submarine just sank beyond a depth where it could be saved.
Morgan points to the photos of the Scorpion's uncrushed bow section to support his theory.
If there had been an explosion on board that ship, this wreckage would not look like this. What we would see would be ripped, torn, and rended wreckage that we largely just don't see at the wreck site. The wreck site photography indicates something slightly less dramatic than an explosion. It seems like the better, the more appropriate explanation is one in which you have a cascading series of negative events inside the ship that start with a small fire that then gets bigger, and the bigger it gets, it knocks out power. When the ship loses power, it loses the ability to counter pump and get rid of any water that has come inside the hull as a result of leaking. And that's going to drag it down, and the result is the loss of the ship.
But if it was a fire, why would the Navy release a story about a rogue torpedo instead of one involving basic mechanical failure? Captain Marquet says it may tie back to another lost sub.
We've operated nuclear submarines since the 50s with an unbelievable safety record, and Thresher and Scorpion are two tragic black marks on the record.
The Thresher was yet another U.S. submarine that sank just 5 years before the Scorpion. During deep dive testing near Cape Cod, a leak shorted out the sub's electrical system and its ability to surface. The Thresher and its 129 men never came home. Many suggest that the isolated torpedo story is better than revealing a potential recurring issue the U.S. Navy may have had with the overall maintenance of its submarines.
We're in the height of the Cold War. For God's sakes, it's 1968. There's a lot going on. The Navy had to keep the loss of this submarine quiet, and that was for no other reason than operational security concerns. Because if it admits that it's been lost, there's the possibility that the Soviet Union will be at the scene of the crime almost immediately, trying to pick through the wreckage.
To this day, the wreck, the USS Scorpion, remains buried.
And the U.S. Navy continues to refuse all requests to reopen the case, which has only added to the mystery and prolonged the anguish of the families who question the official story.